But looks like we're all set and live on YouTube as well. So I'm Dan, and this is Becky, and we are part of the Myo team, and we're excited to have another educational webinar, and we hope that you've been able to receive from some of these in the past few weeks, and we just look forward to more to come. Just kind of a snippet of exercise and Myo atomic level training and how those work together for us. Some of the procedures, topics, things that are helpful technically, things that are helpful metabolically, things that are helpful inspirationally. We want to bring all of those pieces to these educational webinars. So if you are unfamiliar with Myo is atomic level training. We are the only one-on-one private strength training you can perform in business clothes and be done in 20 minutes, once or twice a week, with minimal risk of injury and very little sweat, which is great because of the environment that we have all of our studios in. And we want to come alongside you with thoughtful precision and individual care so that the goals that you have can be realized and experienced in a really efficient, effective, and safe manner. So we have in-studio locations, as I was talking about earlier, with in the Minneapolis area and surrounding area. And we also have an online program that's called Myo Pivot. And so we can check out more information at myostrong.com to check either of those two out, or even just continue to tap into some of these experiences that we have, or some of these educational webinars that we have, and just learn more about what we do and how we do it. So ultimately, our goal is to build you up so that you might build others up. That's what we want to do. So again, I'm Dan, this is Becky, and we talked last week a little bit about speed of motion and momentum and activating specific muscle groups that we're trying to target in our exercise, both in studio. We showed showed one of our exercises, as well as through Myo Pivot, showed an exercise, both comparable. One is our chest press or ventral torso, and another was a push-up. And so you can check that out and learn a little bit more about that. Today, we want to spend some time talking primarily about proper breathing and exercise, and maybe some things that you've heard about, some things that actually are beneficial and helpful for you, both for the actual commencing of the exercise and doing the exercise, but also just safe for your body. So we're going to spend some time there. We'll spend a little time talking about Valsalva and the Valsalva technique and what that is, as well as sharing a little bit more about something called an EIH, or an exercise-induced headache, and what that is, and how to sort of combat that in exercise as well. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Becky to share a little bit more about proper breathing and exercise.
All right, thanks, Dan. That was a great intro. You know, breathing just seems like we breathe all the time. We think this should just be natural, and when we exercise, wouldn't this just carry through? But actually, this topic of breathing is really something that is worthy of the time to discuss, because it can make such a difference in your strength training. One of the things that we want you to remember is, when you are exercising, when you're strength training, we want you to breathe normally. We want you to breathe continuously. We don't want you holding your breath. And you may have heard that term Valsalva, V-A-L-S-A-L-V-A. And that is just that, you know, when you're picking up something heavy, there's a tendency to go like this. And what you're doing is actually building up abdominal pressure behind your glottis, which is your vocal cords. And that actually helps give you this little extra lift, a boost of energy to get that object up. But when you are strength training, it's really important that you breathe continuously. You want to make sure you've got good airflow and fresh oxygen to your muscles. You're calling on lots of blood flow to be going through those muscles, and so you want fresh oxygen. You don't want to be holding your breath. The other thing is, you don't want to have a scheme to your breathing. It used to be said that you would exhale on the lift and inhale on the when you lower a weight, but you don't want to do that. What you want to do is keep breathing naturally as your body is calling for oxygen. And so what tends to happen is, as an exercise gets harder, we tend to hold our breath, But the thing that you want to do is that as you're starting to feel that burn in your muscles as that lactic acid is building up, you'll actually want to increase your breathing. So think of it like this. You're whispering the word, and as that exercise gets harder, you're increasing the speed of that. So it's like you're panting, like you're over breathing. And that will help you by doing very deliberately, that type of breathing will prevent you from holding your breath. And there's several reasons why we don't want to do this Valsalva move where you're holding your breath. One is that it can raise your blood pressure. And back to why you're exercising in the first place. You want exercise so you can get healthy and stronger. You don't want exercise to hurt yourself. So that's one reason. You don't want to raise your blood pressure by breathing improperly and holding your breath. The second thing is when you are doing this Valsalva move of holding your breath, it actually increases the abdominal pressure and decreases the venous return to your heart. So that's another, can cause a type of blood pressure, cardiovascular issue. Again, we want you to be safe when you exercise. And the third thing is that by doing a Valsalva hold with your breath, it actually defeats the purpose of deeply eroding your muscles. Now, there was a couple different webinars ago, we talked about the definition of inroad and deeply fatiguing your muscles and what that means. And so when you are holding your breath, it actually gives your muscles a little bit of a break. And so if you think of a power lifter who will grunt and to get that big lift to break a record, for instance, what that's doing, it's giving those muscles a mechanical assist. Where our goal is to deeply fatigue the muscles. You don't want to be giving your muscles a rest at any point during the exercise. And these are some of those really small things that when you're training and you're trying to learn the fine tuning, the fine points of exercising well, remember to breathe continuously and freely and not holding your breath at all. Anything else you want to say about that, Dan, before I hop on the leg press and we can do a little demo on how to breathe properly and how not to breathe properly?
Yeah, we thought about a whole lot of different creative ways that we could make this really fun. Ultimately, we want to be able to make sure you can get an experience of what it's like to be in one of our studios, to breathe appropriately, which honestly, when we set some goals with people early on, breathing is one of the main pieces. Because it is so counterintuitive to what we've experienced in the past, or it's just different. Naturally, we're trying to hold our breath. Naturally, we're not trying to breathe more. I love the thought of breathing makes it go. That's what we try to tell people, is breathing makes the weight move. The more you breathe, the more it moves, especially when you're really fatigued. You really want to be done and you have 15 seconds left. And so we need to breathe all the more. So that's great, Becky. Let's get you on the machine and hear a little bit more of proper breathing. First, you'll walk through as she gets set up here, proper breathing as well as improper breathing. And we'll also talk briefly about something called off-awning, OFF/awning. And so we'll let Becky demonstrate proper breathing here first. So as an instructor, basically we get all of her measurement, all of her metrics set up, all of the settings for the machine set up. We get her weight set up, and then she doesn't have to think about anything but breathing and pushing with her heels into the resistance as the weight carriage she's sitting on slowly begins to go backwards. So go ahead and begin, Becky, pushing through with your heels. She's going to move at a very slow pace, and just let her breathing be very relaxed, very loose, very free, very natural. She'll hit a hard end stop here in a moment where her legs won't be able to contract to full extension. And then she'll turn, she's turning and she's slowing down. And naturally, she's going to want to hold her breath here on the lower turn, which I can't see to help her with, but she'll do a slow turn here. There you go. You can see her kind of look in her midsection. You can see her shirt moving up and down more rapidly. And that's her breathing just more and more quickly. So here at the top, she'll probably have a chance to kind of catch her breath a little bit. And then as she's going down, catch a little bit more of her breath. And as she gets near the bottom in this lower turn, she'll let her breathing increase all the more rapidly. And she'll barely touch the weights together. Let's see if we can listen a little bit. Good job, Becky. She's doing great. Keep going here. Catching her breath a little bit. She's going down. Good. So breathe more here. Just loosely and freely. Just coming to a momentary muscle failure point here. Inch by inch, she's moving. So keep extending, but very slow, very methodical in her movements. And Becky, we're just going to come down halfway here. Pushing all of her resistance right through her heels. And we'll have you hold right here. 5, 4, 3, 2, and slowly set that weight down as if to do another, but we'll stop there. There you go. Good job, Becky. That's great. It's much different being virtual to take you through that exercise. You did great though, and we could hear you really well. I had to mute my mic for a little bit so we could pick up your mic a little bit more. But good job on that. Just proper breathing. Is there anything you want? I mean, I know you got to catch your breath here too, but that's an indicator of very, very strenuous and challenging exercises. When you're finished, you are out of breath, similar to maybe having run a race on a brief amount of time. So it's good to catch your breath before you can really share more. Is there anything you wanted to add while you catch your breath here?
My heart is pounding like I've been sprinting. You know, it really helps to have a coach. When Dan, when you were guiding me through that, you know, it's very easy to want to fire out of the bottom and get through that really hard part by holding your breath and also speeding it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these really subtle things of breathing properly, and you'll see, I don't know if you could hear, but as I was approaching that lower turnaround where my knees were getting more and more bent and the weight stack was ready to touch, that's the hardest part. We call that like the golden few inches there. And there's a tendency to rush through that. And by increasing your breathing, it helps you pace yourself. That's really effective. And clients who have, I think that's one of the favorite things that people have learned within this is the ability to breathe well through and to get them through those hard spots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a number of, I mean, as you think about improper breathing, essentially any sound that any like consonant type sound or guttural sound or anything like that is, or even a sigh is an indicator of a moment of Valsalva or holding your breath. And it's, again, so often it's a natural response to pushing, and you have to really train yourself otherwise. But an example could be something like, or like it's just, I'm cutting off my airway and I'm increasing that pressure like Becky was talking about, or it could be something simple like, that's sort of the back end of maybe they held their breath for a moment and now the sigh is them releasing their breathing. And it's really interesting too, working with so many people. Most people have no idea that they're holding their breath until you say breathe. And then they breathe and they realize, whoa, I wasn't breathing there for a moment. And so as Becky so properly demonstrated, just a really loose type sound. And it's really helpful for us as instructors, obviously, to be able to hear even that small amount of whisper to indicate, yes, you are breathing, you're not holding your breath, that sort of thing. So that's great. Did you want to show anything on like firing out, or I don't know? You sure can. Okay.
One other thing I want to mention too is there's also a tendency to kind of purse your lips and go, and that can also be a way of holding your breath in a really subtle fashion. So keep your jaw loose. And so think of letting your jaw hang loosely. The other thing that does too is it keeps a lot of tension out of your neck. If your jaw is hanging loosely, then when we get tension in our neck, our shoulders tend to rise, even if we're doing a lower body exercise. So be very conscious that your jaw is hanging loose. So I'll show you firing out of the bottom and what that would look like with Valsalva.
Perfect.
Can you see that, Dan?
Yep, can see that great. So this would look like Becky generating excessive force here and trying to increase her acceleration, even producing momentum, which is a topic that we talked about last week. But I'll let you do that. She'll Valsava here for a moment, hold her breath, and then really drive upwards quickly. So that would be an example of what you'll often see at places that people maybe aren't properly equipped or know properly how to do it. So as you come into the low turn, another example would be this. She's touching here, and then she's going quick, and then she slows down. And this is pretty common for people, especially as they're getting going. That lower golden area that Becky talked about, it's easy because your body doesn't want that space to really fire through that. But our goal is to really linger in that low turn. So that's great, Becky. Can you set that down for a moment? There's one thing that we also can talk about. It's called off-oning, and it's just it's under the kind of the broad topic of segmentation, which we hit a little bit on last week, where we're moving not fluidly and smoothly, but rather we're sort of stopping, and our movement pattern is choppy. Often when you get to a near momentary muscle failure point, there is this desire to overcome the machine and beat the machine, and you're going to sort of let off your muscle a little bit and uncontract a little bit in order to build up. Often Valsava comes in accord with this, but you're going to build up some strength or some force and acceleration. You're going to put extra effort into it in order to accomplish the movement or the repetition. And unfortunately, most of the time to do that well, because your muscles are so fatigued, you actually have to recruit other musculature to do that, which puts yourself in a potentially harmful, unsafe position of which you're totally unaware of, because your body is naturally taking over this desire to complete the repetition, because subconsciously you think that if I finish this repetition, I've accomplished my goal, all of those things. But again, your body doesn't care if you do that repetition or not. It's only your mind. So being able to calm yourself when you hit near that momentary muscle failure point, just to continue pushing and not sort of hold for a moment and then drive forward. So let's say, for example, Becky, you're near momentary muscle failure. We saw it earlier on when you exercise. She was struggling slowly to keep moving inch by inch. And an example of off-oning would be this, where she stops for a moment and then sort of fires through to finish that repetition. So go ahead, Becky. Show us that nice and smooth movement here. And then she sort of fires forward. And it could also be an indicator of a slight like negative movement into a quick, fast, positive movement. So go ahead and you can set that down, Becky. That's an example of off-oning, and it's just counteractive towards what we're trying to do with constant muscle contraction. Giving your muscles even that brief moment of rest and recovery is unhelpful in stimulating a deep muscle fatigue and momentary muscle failure. So that's something we also try to avoid. As you near that point of momentary muscle failure and you're on a positive movement, sometimes it can look like an inch by inch movement that is a little bit of a segmentation. That's okay. We want to be as fluid and we want our movement to be as fluid as possible. And if there's a little bit of that, that's okay, but we don't want it to be excessive in nature, where you see a high movement of 4 or 5 inches under great strain and holding your breath, all those things. So is there anything you wanted to add to off-oning or improper breathing, Becky?
No, I think that's good, Dan. For if you're exercising at home and you don't have an instructor with you, it's a good idea to video yourself. You'll be able to pick up these really subtle things, turn up the volume, and really listen to yourself. Are you breathing continuously and freely? And one great thing too is, even if you're not near the Minneapolis area, we do virtual one-on-one coaching calls via Zoom. And we would love to set up a 30-minute coaching call with you and walk through some of the exercises on MyoPivot and talk you through those. Those have been really fun. Haven't you had fun with those, Dan? Those have just been great. Yeah. And one moment, I wasn't quite sure if how effective this would be, but if it feels like you're standing right in my living room with me.
Yes. And everyone that's done their workouts on their own and then had an instructor with them have all said to me, wow, that's so much more effective to have someone that can watch me, can coach me, can help me activate the muscle groups that I want to activate, can help me breathe. All of those things are helpful for stimulating muscular growth. Yeah, so that's great. Thanks for mentioning that, Becky. And yeah, was there anything else from a breathing standpoint that you're thinking of? That's great. Well, thanks for demonstrating for us and just bringing some insight to proper breathing for us. I was thinking 2 weeks ago, so we have a recent video of a workout that I had done that one of our instructors, Mike, took me through, and it took me 12 minutes. But if you want a good idea of breathing and how to do that well, not that I'm the most amazing person to watch, but I've been doing it for a while. So you can go on and watch that video and just watch how my breathing's slow at the beginning and how it increases near the end, and you can almost feel like you're hyperventilating. So even in that, as we were talking about, it's good to take moments in that movement pattern where you calm down, you control your breathing, and it's a little bit more deep. You can sort of catch your breath. But all of this breathing also brings us into one topic that we could spend a lot more time on. We're not going to spend a ton of time on today, but it's something called an exercise-induced headache, which is relatively uncommon. But we still see it enough to be aware of it and to be able to help people through it. So there aren't a lot of people that are affected by it. And sometimes people are affected by it and it's sort of a late onset. Oftentimes it happens kind of early on in someone's experience with the way that we approach exercise and strength training, because it is so intense, because we're trying to be so efficient in it, that they might feel this. And basically what it is in strength training, the way that we approach it, we're under a constant muscle contraction. And what's happening is the amount of effort that you have to put into that is very meaningful, and it's very challenging, very difficult, because we want to be within, like a 5 to 8 repetition window, not a lot of repetitions. And so initially you're already pushing or pulling at a great resistance. And so what's happening is there's an increased blood flow to your heart in that. And it's a positive thing because it's really working your cardiovascular system and the effort of your heart and the compliance of your heart to be able to take in blood, but then to be able to put it out at a pace that meets the demands that you're putting on it in the exercise. But what happens in an EIH, or an exercise-induced headache, is there's a massive flow of blood back to the heart, and it basically overwhelms the heart. And the blood has to go somewhere as it's forced upward. And what happens is there's essentially regulators in your above your heart, there's regulators below your heart to make sure that, based on gravity and the heart pumping blood to the extremities of your body, it's not so powerful to overwhelm your body. But going upwards, because of gravity, because of how our bodies are created too, there's not as much of a need, because blood generally doesn't flow upwards at the same pressure and power that it could flow downwards. And so there's regulators below but not above. And so when the blood is milked from the extremities of your body, especially your lower body, as a number of people experience in EIH on something like a leg press, the blood flows back and it has nowhere to go because your heart isn't ready to take all that in. And basically it continues up into your head, into your brain, and stretches your dura, or the covering of your brain, and it creates a little bit of a gap there. And happens in that moment is you sort of feel a thunderclap type headache that often can begin back here, and it's dull at first, but in the matter of one repetition can basically move from back here all the way up over your head, even settling in your eyes. And it can become very, very painful, and much like a migraine, or a significant migraine if you've had even that level. And so that's essentially what's happening in your body. And so it's a negative consequence of something that can happen via a positive experience of muscular strength. And so, as I mentioned, oftentimes if it happens, it's going to happen with someone who's unfamiliar with our techniques of constant muscle contraction and inroading in a brief amount of time. It can also happen in people who maybe generally have more muscle atrophy in their upper body, or less muscle in their upper body, to be able to help prevent that blood flow up to the brain so quickly. And there's been so much research on this, and there's a lot of positive things that can come out of this strength training. This is one thing that has kind of eluded researchers for a number of years beginning all the way back even to the early Nautilus industries and movement and research. But Dr. Doug McGuff was a pivotal and key person in helping us understand really what's happening. You can check out a lot of his information. He's so great. He's a doctor, a medical doctor. I think we've even referenced him before. Yep, he's the one that wrote Body by Science, which we referred to. And in that book, actually, he talks a little bit about some of these things too, so you can understand a little bit more. But his experience with strength training in the methodology of super slow motion that we use, or super slow, excuse me, the protocol that we use, he uses it. So after an experience with somebody he was working with, he was able to understand more and more of what's actually happening based on his experience in the medical field too. And so that's kind of brought alignment to us being able to really help people work through it. And there isn't, it's not like a one size fits all. Everyone responds a little bit differently. There's different ways to offset it from happening. As it happens, what we want to make sure, and if it ever happens to you in Myo Pivot or even in studio, what we want to do is immediately stop the exercise. Like, it is not worth pushing through. It's not something that you want to push through. Do not push through the pain. It can be very unsafe for you to do that. Generally speaking, the ramifications aren't grave, but we just don't encourage you to push through. Just set the weight down, rest, let your brain recover, let your body recover, and then try it again in maybe a few days. And so that break is really helpful. All that Becky was sharing about breathing is a massive way to offset Valsalva and EIH. Just letting blood flow and oxygen flow freely through your body is such a massive piece. So that can also be something that happens with somebody that gets an EIH, is they've Valsalva'd some, or they've been holding their breath, or they're just getting used to it, and they have a great amount of weight that they're pushing. So that's an example as well. So there's three different things that can potentially bring on an EIH for someone. Was there anything you wanted to add, Becky, to that, or your experience with EIHs? Or
I struggle with EIH, and that Kevin, the co-founder of Myo, actually was my trainer at the time, and he helped me. I was not breathing fast enough, and also he changed up the order of my routine. And so that I was doing different exercises that, like the one exercise that would tend to trip that up was a upper body exercise, as you mentioned, Dan. And so he just changed up my routine. And within, maybe 6 weeks or so after those combination of things, that EIH, I didn't have a problem with that. I have not had a problem with it since, and it's been 6 years. So.
Yeah, and that's often what we experience too. As we work through that, might take a little bit of time, a few sessions. We'll sometimes just avoid that machine for a little while, and then often we can get people back on it, and they're able to continue progressing in all the main exercises that we look to do. Also, I was going to say that we've also put a number of people, and many people, kind of move them into a neck exercise, which helps. Which helps create greater relaxation as we're fatigued, less stress, less sort of tension in our neck and contracting our neck as we're doing other movements, other exercises, but also can help by just helping that the pump and blood flow back to the heart to have a greater capacity to endure some of the exercises that we're doing and help with that compliance, so the heart can actually take in what's being pushed back to it. And so often we'll put people on like a posterior neck exercise, which fatigues their neck, and then they're able to move in and commence the rest of their exercise routine. And really, for most, there's little to no, effective in EIH again. So yeah, it's great. Was there anything you wanted to add, just in general, Becky?
I think the last thing I wanted to say was, and I think was that when you look at your breathing, you start paying attention to your breathing. If you're finding yourself doing a lot of holding your breath, Valsalva, that grunting, it may be an indication that the weight you're trying to move is too heavy. And there's no shame in lowering the weight, because like we talked about in past webinars, we want you to exercise and we want you to be safe. We also want you to have a real steady motion, but if you're having to keep starting and stopping and having a really short, you can only do 2 repetitions of something, lower the weight. The other thing is if you're doing myopivot and you're moving your body, doing body weight, there are many regression options. So if you can't do a pull-up, for instance, and which many people can't, it's better for you to find a regression that works well with you so you can control that weight instead of using your breath to kind of grunt and jerk through the movement. So think of control of the weight and control of your breathing, and they really go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's great, Becky. Appreciate you saying that.
All
So
right.
I think that wraps up everything for us.
All right. Well, thanks, Dan. And it was great to have you on with the webinar with us. Thanks for watching along. If you have any more questions, reach out to us at myostrong.com. And also subscribe to the YouTube channel for Myo. And we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar. See you next
That's awesome. Yep. Take care. Thanks, Becky.
All right. See you, Dan.
Bye.